Hello. Today we're going to look at conflict management in mission organizations. Conflict is a really important issue in missions, and it occurs far more often than it should be. We're going to be looking at two competing paradigms, submission or cooperation. Those are the titles of the two paradigms, the two models that we're going to look at, and both of which are quite popular in mission circles. Now, let's just talk about conflict in mission organizations in general. First of all, conflict is actually quite common in mission organizations, especially between missionaries on the field. Missionaries are working in often very difficult situations where their competence, their cultural competence, their professional competence is limited. Because if you're working in an unreached area, no one really knows the best way to reach people for Christ. So it's a pretty common phenomena among missionaries. It's also quite painful, because here you have missionaries who love the Lord, who want to do what's right, and within their team they're having some type of conflict where they're hurting each other, and they both know that this isn't supposed to be happening, and so there's a lot of pain involved. This, of course, interferes with ministry. And it turns out that conflict is a major source of attrition. Now, people don't necessarily want to say that they're leaving the mission because of conflict. They'd like to say, oh, our kids need to grow up in a more stable environment, or we have sick parents that we need to be taken care of and stuff. But when you start interviewing missionaries, you see more and more that conflict was a factor that caused them to leave the field. So the question is, how do we manage conflict? We're going to look at two different models, two different approaches, two different paradigms of how to organize conflict. The first one's going to be called the submission paradigm, and the second one is going to be the cooperation paradigm. Now, I am not presenting these perfectly neutrally. I'm going to argue for the cooperation paradigm, but hopefully I'll present the submission paradigm in a fairly accurate way. Now, the submission paradigm, this is kind of a more traditional authoritarian approach, and I'm going to present this by giving you some quotes from a popular missionary book by Thomas Hale called On Being a Missionary. And it says, missionaries are to submit to their leaders regardless of his qualities, and these leaders are to mediate God's will in the Christian community. So the idea is that God communicates his will through leaders that a missionary has. And so to question one's leader is to question God. Second quote here is, mission authorities may themselves unknowingly violate Scripture in the exercise of their duties, which it's usually how it is when people are sinful. When people are sinful, they don't say, aha, I'm sinful, I'm going to go rebel against God. They justify it in their mind. So an awful lot of sin is unknowing. Mission authorities may themselves unknowingly violate Scripture in the exercise of their duties, but that is a different matter. That does not give a worker license to disobey or rebel against their authority. So Hale says that even if the missions leader is doing something sinful or abusive, but he doesn't really know what he's doing, the missionary still needs to submit. That's what counts. Otherwise, it's rebellion against the authority that God's given them. The person who is not prepared to submit willingly to the decisions of his leader should not come to the mission field. So he's saying that, yeah, you've got to submit. That's the most important way to resolve conflicts on the mission field is to submit. And so, as I said, Thomas Hale and other traditional missionaries represent this. You might be familiar with Bill Gothard and the Institute in Basic Youth Conflicts. He was quite popular in the 70s and the 80s and in the homeschool movement before he eventually had to resign because of the abuse that was found out that occurred in his organization. Now, in contrast, there's the cooperation paradigm. The cooperation paradigm views conflict differently. It's not viewed as, aha, the solution to the conflict is to obey the person that's hierarchically above you, and your duty is to submit. Rather, the cooperation paradigm views conflict as an opportunity to find solutions that respond to the interests of both missionaries. Perhaps one higher in authority, perhaps one lower in authority, perhaps two teammates. Conflict is viewed as an opportunity to find the best solution possible that responds to both parties' concerns. And this is quite biblical. The Apostle Paul said in Philippians 2:4, "Do not merely look out for your own personal interests, but also for the interest of others." So there's our own interests that we're going to be concerned about, but there's also the interests of others, and we need to look for solutions that take into consideration both parties' interests. Jesus said, "If anyone wants to be first, he shall be the last of all and servant of all." So rather than lording it over or dominating other people, as is considered the norm in the submission paradigm, the focus in the cooperation paradigm is mutual submission. The great leader is the one who submits to others, who seeks the interests of others. And so this is quite different than focusing on submission. The focus is on serving one another, or mutual submission, to find the best solution that responds to the concerns of both parties. Now this diagram here can help us understand what's going on here. Over on this side, we have low concerns for other interests. Some people just don't care about what the other person wants. Over here, we have high concern for others' interests, and some people will want to consider what other people are interested in. Now, the vertical axis is high concern for one's own interests, like, yeah, I really want what I want, and the down here is low concern for one's own interests, saying, yeah, I'm not gonna fight for it. And so we can be high or low in these two dimensions, concern for our own interests or concern for the other's interest. And this combination of concerns creates different quadrants, different combinations. For example, if you're if you're highly concerned about your own interests, but you're not concerned for others' interests, the way that you're going to approach conflict is what's known as competition or domination. The goal is to get the other person to do what you want. Now, the opposite side of this is when you're very concerned about the other's interests and you're not concerned about your own interests. It's known as accommodation. And you'll just say, oh, okay, I'll do what the other person wants. I won't ask questions. And so this combination of competition and domination, paired with the lower status person doing accommodation, is pretty much what the submission paradigm calls for. Now, a third combination is where you say, oh, I'm not that concerned about other people's interests, and I'm not that concerned about my own interests. That strategy for resolving conflicts is called avoidance. It's like, ooh, we'll just stay away from these topics. Neither what that person wants or what I want is that important, so we'll just avoid. Now, in the cooperation paradigm that I'm presenting to you, cooperation occurs when you're concerned both for the other person's interests and for your own interests. You might think that your idea is really good. The other person thinks that his ideas or her ideas are really good. And what you're going to do is you're going to try to combine everything and find some solution that takes into consideration both your own interests and the interests of others. And you do that by what's known as cooperation. Trying out lots of different solutions and figuring out which one best responds to everybody's interests. Now, let's talk about some of the problems with these different paradigms. Let's go back to the submission paradigm. And one of the greatest problems with the submission paradigm are the effects of power. You've probably heard of the saying that power tends to corrupt, or power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Well, it turns out that there is a lot of empirical evidence that supports the idea that power really does tend to corrupt people. Not everybody is going to be corrupted by power, but on the average, people move towards higher levels of what we would consider ungodly behavior when they're given power. Now, to understand the experiments that have been done that have shown this, we need to understand that there's a couple categories of power. The first is what's known as personal power, and that's the power that resides inside a person. Maybe the person is an expert, the person knows a lot, they've had a lot of experience, and they can communicate it well. That is personal power. Maybe they're really well liked, people trust them, they're really good at understanding people and situations. That's relational power. And those type of powers tend to corrupt less than the second type of power, which is positional power. Positional power is power that's assigned within an organization and can be transferred from one person to another. Personal power, it's not easy to transfer expertise or relational power just by some type of administration declaration. But with positional power, it's like, aha, you're in charge now. And the way that organizations work is that the person's in charge, that person suddenly has positional power. Now, this positional power often includes the ability to reward and punish. That might be in terms of annual reports, annual evaluations. It might be in terms of whether a person's budget request will be approved or not. Maybe they want to move to a different ministry or something like that. And the power to punish, the ultimate power to punish in mission organizations is asking the person to resign. And so typically, that type of positional power is the type that can lead to the greatest effects of corruption. Now let's look at some experiments that have been done, some of the results of experiments that show what the effects of power are. Now typically, the way that these experiments are done is that you've got two people, that one person is arbitrarily assigned to be the boss, and the other person is assigned to be the worker. And it's just completely arbitrary. There's no difference in skill levels between the boss and the worker, and maybe they'll give the boss a hat that says boss on it, and they'll give the worker a hat or a t-shirt or something that says worker on it. And they have them work on some problem together. And then they have the boss or the worker rate different things. Now, it turns out that when one is given positional power, it increases one's sense of worth. And we've all seen this with bosses. It basically, when somebody gets a promotion, when somebody gets an authority, it goes to their head. They think they are more important than they were before. And we do surveys on people, and when people get a promotion, sure enough, they think they're more important than they were before. And some of the underlying psychological mechanisms that seem to be causing this is people are saying, well, I've gotten this power. There must be a reason that I've been given this power, so I must be more worthy. A second phenomena that's been measured is that once you have power, you become the target of flattery. People want to be close to you so that they can get you to do things because you have power. And so subordinates tend to use flattery quite a bit. And it turns out that flattery is extremely effective in getting people with power to do what they want. It's one of the most effective methods that there are. People just love hearing how good they are, how good their ideas are. And then they start hearing constantly how good their ideas are, regardless of how good they are, and they start thinking, aha, I really am a good leader. I'm getting all this feedback saying that I'm a good leader. Now, a second problem with being given power is that it lowers one's value of the subordinates. Just like the person with power thinks they're more important, they start thinking, okay, this guy's not given power. He must be pretty incompetent, not very worthwhile. And sure enough, in these studies, when somebody is assigned the role of being a subordinate, and even if they're told it's just randomly, they're viewed as being less competent. And so this can happen in missions also. Somebody is elevated to the position of field chairman or something, and they can start thinking they're a lot more worthwhile, their ideas are better, they're superior in some way, and the subordinates that weren't, it's clear the reason that they weren't given the position is that they have inferior value. Now, another really strange and really dangerous problem with power is that once one has been given more power, one has a tendency to want to stop developing relationships with people that are lower than him or her. And it appears that the reason for this is that friendship, if you've got this emotional tie with somebody, it lowers one's ability to coerce the person to do what they want to do, because you can't coerce a friend. But if you keep your distance between yourself and those that you're leading, you feel more free to use your power to coerce them to do what you want. Now, all of these things in combination enables the justification of abuses. The leader's well-being is more important than the other's well-being. The leader is worth more than the subordinate is worth less than the leader. The leader doesn't want to get too close to the subordinate. And since the leader is more important, the leader's needs are more important. And we typically see this happen in money and sex are the ones that are really visible. The leader just says, yeah, I've got needs, and they're justified because I need to function well for the well-being of the organization. But we can also see that in relational issues where no longer making the effort to deal with conflict, the leader says, my needs are more important, I don't have time for that. And so that justifies abusive actions, and whether it's sex or money or bullying, the ability to have the power that someone has makes them more likely to justify any abuses. Now, let's go back to the cooperation paradigm now. And one of the main problems with the cooperation paradigm is that it's really time-consuming. It requires mutual understanding from both parties. If the two parties are going to try to understand each other, that's going to take a lot of time. You're going to have to let the other person talk. You're going to have to provide them feedback so that they can so you can find out if you're really understanding them. And then it's also time consuming because you've got to be creative and come up with all kinds of alternative solutions to find out which one is best for both parties. So that's the first problem with the cooperation paradigm. The cooperation paradigm is also very difficult for certain people. Now, first of all, it's more difficult for people with power than people without power. As people with power, they basically have to give up some of their power if they're going to listen and take into consideration what the other person wants to say. Like Jesus said, the greatest leader is the one that serves the other. But when we have power, it's nice to have power. We get what we want. So it's especially difficult for people with power to adopt a cooperating perspective. It's also difficult for people with who are low in what is known as the need for cognition. Now, the need for cognition is a personality trait, and this need for cognition is this tendency to engage in and enjoy effortful cognitive activity. Cognitive activity basically means thinking and problem solving. Some people really enjoy problem solving. They have what's known as a high need for cognition. They need to think through issues. They need to evaluate things. They need to compare alternatives to find the best solution. Other people do not feel that need at all. Once they've got an idea, That's good. Talking about other ideas is a pain, and they just do not feel the need to think about issues. So people that have a low need for cognition aren't very motivated to want to participate in the cooperation paradigm. A second personality trait that makes it difficult to cooperate is a low perspective taking ability. We all differ in our ability to see something from another's point of view. Now, if you're really good at seeing something from another person's point of view, the cooperation paradigm, the cooperation process can go pretty quickly and pretty smoothly. But if you have a hard time understanding why the other person's idea is legitimate from their perspective, it'll be really difficult, and you'll have to put a lot more effort into understanding their point of view. So one of the main problems with the cooperation paradigm is that it's time consuming and it's very difficult for some people. However, I think it's worth it because it yields superior results and it's more biblical, and I think that's what God wants. Now let's talk about how could we actually implement the cooperation paradigm in a missions organization. Well, there needs to be what's known as a conflict management system in each missions organization. Sometimes it's just called a CMS. Basically, what that is a policy and people who have part of their job assignment to help resolve conflicts. Now, the policy, the conflict resolution policy that a mission organization has and needs to have, has to be more than just a piece of paper, a set of rules that are designed by a lawyer to protect the organization from liability, because sometimes conflicts explode and somebody says, I'm going to sue you, and the other party says, aha, look, we had this paper that you agreed to, you didn't follow it, we're not responsible. Now, that's just having a policy with a lot of fine print is not a real conflict management system. Whatever system, whatever set of rules are put into place needs to be promoted by the leadership as a valid way to resolve conflict. In addition, people need to receive training in conflict management. At all levels, people need to receive training in conflict management and how to cooperate, how to seek each other's interest, and understand why this is a superior approach to conflict resolution. And then also the organization needs to provide personnel who can provide mediation, acting as a third party between conflicting people who can help the two of them understand each other's perspective and come up with mutually satisfying solutions. And the policy has to be that the most generally, mediation sounds like a good idea unless you have the power, and people that have power generally don't want mediation. But the conflict management system, the rules of the organization, need to state clearly that the powerful party cannot deny a request for mediation. In addition, for mediation to work, the system has to provide a mutually acceptable mediator who's perceived trustworthy and neutral by both parties. Because sometimes the supervisor of the more powerful person, well, that supervisor is pretty close to the person that has the power, and they might not be neutral. And so if the lower power party does not trust them, the mediation is not going to work. We've got to choose somebody that has that's mutually respected by both the parties.